Well, hello. It's Dave here at Dad Space. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Today I have a guest. I love having guests. If you ever want to be a guest on Dad Space, just reach out. I'd love to have you come on. Carl did just that. And Carl is joining us today from a state park in Utah. Antelope Island is where he lives, and there's only 2 houses. Two houses in his community, his and his neighbor. And yes, they get along. And Carl is on to talk about being a dad. We talk a little bit about ADHD. We talk about being a dad in a place where the kids are told to watch out for the bison instead of being told to watch out for the cars. Here on Dad Space, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you here. Here we go. Here's our conversation with Carl James, here on the Dad Space podcast. You know it, you love it. Here we are. Here we go. Okay, welcome to Dad Space. I have a guest who lives in a very interesting place in the beautiful US of A. He lives somewhere quite unique with his family, and he's coming on Dad Space to talk about his dad journey and the uniqueness of raising a family where he is. If that's not enough to make you curious, to stick around, he's also a really nice guy. So Carl is with me today. Carl, welcome to Dad Space. Nice to have you here.
Thanks, Dave. I'm super excited to be on the show. I'm looking forward to talking to all of your listeners.
It's great. How many podcasts have you guested on to date?
This one is my first, so I'm very nervous.
Here we go.
I'm very excited, very nervous, all the things.
So we have like a huge initiation process we have to go through. So
okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
I'm just kidding. I have nothing to initiate you with. So you're in. So this is your first episode ever on a podcast. Do you listen to podcasts at all?
I do. I listen to a few. I host my own. I'm into podcasts.
Wait. You said you host your own podcast.
I do. I have my own podcast. I've just not been on someone else's.
Can you please plug your podcast? Please. I would love to know more.
Certainly. My podcast is called Parl the Human. And it's just kind of, it's still kind of young, so it's evolving and changing, I'm 10 episodes in. But I am a dad with ADHD, and that affects every aspect of my life. And I've just I've been trying to explore that and explore my life in general, and just kind of, you might have to bleep this, but try to get my shit together, basically, in all aspects of my life. So that's the short rambling version of it.
So is that what the podcast is about then?
Yes, it is.
Good. So 10 episodes in. What's the hardest thing about being a podcaster, and what's the most fun thing about being a podcaster?
I love editing.
Oh, good.
I've done several episodes with some creative editing and like adding music and sound, and I've done different characters even. So I'm trying to kind of mix, real life and some fictional elements, but that kind of illustrate that factness.
Cool.
Sorry, words are hard now that I'm talking to you.
I can make up words. We make up words all the time.
Great. Yeah.
What is the hardest thing about being a podcaster?
I think narrowing down what I want to do.
Okay.
Because it's a very broad thing, this topic that I've chosen. And the more other podcasts I listen to, the more ideas I have. And it seems like every idea could be its own podcast entirely.
I know, right?
So just picking and choosing what I can incorporate into mine and what I need to just enjoy about other podcasts and not try to do myself.
That's why I have 7, because I just have so many ideas. My wife thinks I'm completely crazy I have probably 4 more ideas, but I've run out of calendar. So that's my problem. It's great. So yeah, I love talking to podcasters. Uh, so Carl, are you talking about you specifically in this podcast? Are you talking about a fictional Carl? Like, what's the idea?
It's me specifically.
Okay.
Like everything that I talk about is, applicable to other people, but I don't approach it as an expert. I approach it as me trying to explore myself and how to, improve these different aspects of my own self and my own life. But I have interviewed my 12-year-old self, so it's a
Wow.
me that used to exist, I guess.
Wow. So you've gone back in time. You have like a
I
DeLorean or
have.
something.
Yes, it's very magical.
I love it. Okay. So what would you say? What is an example of a podcast that you like to listen to? Because you mentioned you listen. So what other
Uh-huh.
podcasts do you find entertaining or teach you something?
I've really been into, speaking of fictional and time travel, I've been into a podcast, or I guess an audio drama called Midnight Burger.
Midnight Burger.
It's
I'll write that down.
yeah, it's about a diner that can transcend space and time and dimensions, and uh, it's and they
Wow.
just kind of plop down into different timelines and different universes, and every episode, or every, they have some that go on for 3 or 4 episodes, but the diner basically lands somewhere where someone needs the assistance of someone who works there.
So talk
And
about
it's
a place that's like takeout to go. Like the whole restaurant
yeah,
goes there.
for sure. For sure.
I
And
love
it's
it.
just this ragtag group. There's like a genius astrophysicist and a woman who ran a taco truck until she walked in for lunch and decided to stay. So I really like that one.
Beautiful. That's great. Yeah. Any other ones
Yeah.
that come to mind?
I've been listening to the Badass Counseling Show with Sven Erlandson. He's really good, really straightforward. I've done therapy and counseling myself, and I recommend it to anyone. It's a great thing to do, and he just has a really straightforward way of dealing with things, and he gets guests on, and they get really deep, really fast, and it's interesting, it's insightful. I've come home to my wife and said, Sven said this, and it's really fascinating. So
Awesome.
I've liked that one.
Awesome. Okay. So we talked about this at the beginning, when I first started the podcast. You live somewhere, excuse me, you live somewhere quite unique and in a situation with your family that, again, I haven't had anybody that I've known that is doing what you're doing as a family. So can you tell everybody where you are, first of all, and then the uniqueness of your family situation and how you're blending your job with your home life, because you really don't leave work ever. So it's quite
Certainly.
interesting. Yeah, let us know about this.
Yeah, well, I live on a actual desert island in the Great Salt Lake of Utah. It's Antelope Island, which is a state park. It's owned by the state of Utah, and I am a ranger, historian. I I manage a historic site specifically on the island, and like everything that entails.
Oh, I'm interested now. You got me in history. Keep
Good.
going, but we're going to come back to that. Keep going, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I manage the historic site. Um, it, Anytime we want to dig a hole, we have to jump through a bunch of hoops with the state and even federal regulations and things. And one of those is having an archaeologist come out. So I deal with that. I deal with all the paperwork of, saying that, we looked at this site and we didn't find anything of, historic or cultural value that we're going to destroy by digging a hole. So I do that. I I have several mysteries that I'm trying to solve when I have some time to actually get out of my designated work area and go follow my own interests a little bit. Um, so yeah, that's where I work.
Yeah, and you live there though.
I do. There are 2 houses out here, and I'm lucky enough to occupy one of them with my wife and our 3 boys.
So is there another family living in the other house then?
There is. There's
Okay.
one other family out
So,
here.
so you have neighbors.
Hmm.
One set of
One
neighbors.
one neighbor. We have 28,000 acres, and our neighbors are 50 yards away.
So I hope you guys get along.
We do. We do. We haven't.
That's
We
got
get
you can't
together for
escape.
game nights, but
Okay, good. All
yeah,
right, yeah. Okay, so let's jump. Well, this is unique. I
there's a lot to touch here.
oh gosh, yeah. Okay, I love history. So as soon as you say the word history, you got me. Can you give us a little bit of historical background to where you guys are? Is there something unique that's happened there, or unique history about where you are?
Certainly. The island that we live on, Antelope Island, we have history going back about 6,000 years
Oh,
is how far we can, document and show artifacts that we've found. So for thousands of years, people have looked at Antelope Island and the Great Salt Lake and said, that's a place where I want to go. It's just so intriguing, so fascinating to people that even 6,000 years ago, they were hopping on boats, packing up all their stuff and coming out. We think it was just hunting expedition, so it wasn't long term, but coming out to explore and see what was out here on this island.
were there antelope on the island? Being Antelope Island?
There were,
Okay,
yes.
good. Well, there you go.
Yes,
That makes
definitely
sense.
antelope. We still have antelope today. They're probably, very, I don't know how genetically they change over
Yeah.
6,000 years, but we have them. I just don't know if they're exactly the same.
Okay.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah. Any crazy historical things that you guys have found? You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we found blah blah blah.
Not necessarily anything crazy, nothing
Okay.
surprising or anything. Um, but we have the 6,000 years, and then in 1847, the Mormon pioneers arrived in the Salt Lake City Valley. They kind of just settled in Salt Lake City and spread out from there very quickly. So in 1848, a man named Fielding Garr came to Antelope Island and decided he was going to start a ranch. So he built the site where I work. He built a house there. He built a few outbuildings, and the church kind of came to him. The Latter Day Saint Church, the Mormons, came to him and said, the church owns all this cattle. Will you keep it for us on the island? So he had all of that. He kept other people's cattle. I call him like the pawn shop of cattle. People would bring their cattle, he would take care of it, and then they would come back and pick their cattle up and pay him for the service, or if they didn't show up, it would become his, and he'd sell it and make a profit that way. So um,
Like a
kind of
cow
like what a pawn
daycare.
shop does.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
basically.
okay. So I think when we talked originally, you said something about instead of your kids worrying about your kids playing out in the street and having to get out of the way of cars, your kids have a different thing they need to watch out for. Uh, you were talking about wildlife that the kids are like, hey, kids, just keep in mind, watch out for whatever. Tell me, how do your
Yeah.
kids responding to living there? Is this the only place they've lived? Like, is the only thing they know?
We lived in a town before this.
Okay.
I had one other professional job with Utah State Parks before transferring here, and one of them kind of vaguely remembers it. We moved here when he was, I believe, 3 years old.
Okay.
So he has very vague memories, and we go back and visit friends in that town often. So
Okay.
he may even just be remembering that. But yeah, for the most part, one of my kids was born here. And yeah, all they know is this desert island. And, we throw them outside, and once in a while, we'll get cars driving by our house, but we're kind of away from all the main roads and all the traffic.
Yeah.
So we put them outside and we say, watch out for bison, or watch out for the antelope, or watch out for the deer.
Okay.
And then we go to the grocery store and they're running crazy through the parking lot, and like they just don't have that same concept of watching out for cars, and it's a little bit scary.
So
But yeah, it's
yeah.
a totally different life for them.
So I live in Canada. When I was in high school, I lived northern Canada, northern Ontario, and I was actually chased by a moose. So
Oh,
that was fun. Those things are long-legged, crazy, fast-running animals. They're huge.
they are.
And yeah, I was riding my bike and I came around the corner and he's looking at a moose. And I'm like, okay, that wasn't expecting that. So that's my closest encounter with anything wildlife related. But that's a great thing for your kids to grow up in. Like, what an environment, and the
Hmm.
things that they can learn with you and nature and you taking them out to do stuff. I think this is a unique thing that your kids are going to grow up with, and you never know where this is going to lead them, right?
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
from your perspective, what are your hopes for your kids as they soak in the environment and all the things that they're learning living where they are? Do you kind of have a wish and a hope for them down the road?
I wouldn't say wishes and hopes necessarily. Like my wife and I have been very uh we allow them to kind of develop their own interests and be whatever or whoever they want.
Good.
And they're going to public school and stuff, so they're getting some influence from people other than us. But for the most part, we've just kind of allowed them to be themselves. And I feel like this space out here is a great place for that. There's not that influence of the outside world, and not that the outside world is bad. I know some people speak like that, and they shelter their kids to the point that it's uh, uh, yeah, I can't think of the words now, to the point that it like harms their kids. Basically, they don't
Yeah.
develop necessary skills because they're so sheltered.
Yeah.
um but I mean, they go outside and they can climb on rocks and they can fall off of the rocks. Fortunately, no one's broken an arm or anything yet, but I mean, they can break their arm if they need to, I guess. They can skin their knee. Like,
Yeah.
they're not, well, we have a video game system now, so they're inside a lot more, but they're more outdoor kids than indoor kids, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So, as a dad, what are some of the things you've tried with your kids? And like, we're all learning as dads. Nobody really gives you the ultimate manual when you have a child and says, follow this and you'll be fine. We're all kind of figuring things out. What kind of things are you learning about yourself as a dad?
These are the tough questions. um, I think for me, it's been number one, patience.
Mm,
Just really being patient with them, not
yeah.
understanding everything because they're young and figuring things out. But also being patient with myself. And I was just watching a show the other night, and they were talking about spanking, and I got to thinking about how my dad spanked me, and he was never calm or anything about it. He was just angry and frustrated. And I can probably count on both hands the number of times I've hit my kids, and it's the same thing. I've never done it out of love or teaching or discipline. It's me being angry and losing control. And I need to be more patient with them and also with myself, because it's really easy to say, oh, I lost my temper today and
Mhm.
spanked my kid. I'm this horrible dad and I've messed up, and I might as well just leave
Yeah.
at this point. And like it's really weird how we're helping them grow up, but we still have to grow ourselves up
Yeah.
at the same time. Like we're
Right.
not done growing.
I heard a great example of discipline in a story where uh, we discipline our kids so that they will be safe and make good choices. And when they make bad choices, we need to address it. But there was a father out with his son, and the son is standing beneath, like at the bottom of a tree, and above him in the tree was a snake. And it was a poisonous snake, and the snake was kind of coming down towards the son, and he had no idea. He was just standing by the tree, and the father from across the yard could see the snake coming for his son, like coming down. So he just yelled at his son, "Get on the ground." And it wasn't a matter of, "But I don't want to," or "What?" And there wasn't none of that. It was, my dad said it, I do it. And the kid dropped to the ground immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was not even there was no whining, complaining, questioning. Dad said, "Get on the ground." I'm getting on the ground. Right? Because the son trusted the father, and the father had proven that you listen to me and I will keep you safe. I will do my best. Right? And I just love that picture of just immediate, just the response of no complaining and no arguing, right? No whining, just action. Because dad said it, I'm going to do it. Right. And that's hard to show kids because, you know, they all have their own ways of doing things, right? I've got 3 kids, and they all have their own ways of thinking and processing. But when dad says, and in that situation, there was a reason why it was really important that they obeyed in that second, because it could have had some bad consequences. So I think that whole idea of discipline that you brought up is something that we haven't talked about here on Dad Space very much. And I just think it's something that helps to develop our kids towards good choices and the ability to listen and the ability to take direction. Because then sometimes there's no time to talk about why. It's just to do it now. Right. And so every time I hear somebody talk discipline, I go to that story about the snake because there was no time to debate or have a sit down and talk about our feelings moment. It was get on the ground. So, right. So I like that. Yeah.
That's a good one. And I think the problem for me anyway is that there aren't often snakes in the trees. Like when we're practicing discipline, the snake in the tree is we're going to be late for school. And like that's not nearly as dangerous as getting bitten by a snake, right? So, but those are also the moments where we as parents become the most frustrated and, you know, do those disciplines that maybe aren't as effective as they should be. So I think the challenge is, you know, creating that environment where we can practice for the times when there's a snake in the tree, and when dad yells, "Get down," you just get down. But to practice that, like we practice getting to school on time, we practice doing our morning routines, brushing our teeth, getting dressed, making our beds, things like that.
I think it's that combination of discipline and trust, right? Trust from your kids to you that when you say, "This is how we do things here, this is how we do things here," right? And they just trust that, yeah, okay, that's how things are. That's what I'm going to do. And the other thing is, I guess, trust from a parent's point of view that all of the lessons we teach our kids throughout life is going to help shape them and guide them in some way. Because I know I've heard many, many people come on and say, "Well, I'm going to do a better job than my dad did because my dad was fill in the blank and I'm going to do better." But then I always try to remind them that your kids are going to say the same thing about you when they're a parent. They're going to say, "My dad was great," or "My dad was not so great, and I'm going to be better than he was," even though we're doing our best with what we know at the time, like you mentioned earlier, right? We don't know all the answers, but we're trying to do our best. So, yeah, I think creating that safe place where kids can trust us, that We try to discipline and love, and showing them the results of their actions. Because I don't want. So there's been times when my kids were little, I would try to do things to lessen the blow or remove a bad experience because I don't want them to live it. But they're not going to learn anything if I have them so sheltered that they never make a mistake. Right? They're going to have to make a mistake.
Right.
They're going to have to learn how to deal with being late for school. Well, this is what's going to happen. Right? And until you learn that lesson, you're never going to trust that being on time for school is actually an important thing. You got to learn that lesson. So, yeah. Interesting. Okay. You mentioned earlier too that you're kind of working through and living with ADHD. Like, as a dad, what kind of implications does that have for you as you kind of navigate that? Because that I think is something that I think some of my listeners would really love to hear your approach and how you kind of work with that and through that.
One of my kids is diagnosed with ADHD as well. And he and I probably clash the most because we're so much alike. Yeah, my wife also has it, so it's like a household thing. It's just our life.
Wow.
But I think for me, the hardest thing is developing routines and sticking with them. Because when you have something like ADHD, it affects the executive function, things like deciding to make your bed or eating. I forget to eat lunch sometimes because I'll get so sucked into my work, or on the other hand, I'll sit down on my lunch break and I'll get so sucked into Facebook on my phone that I just won't eat. Things like that. And routines help you to do those things. Like, oh, I sat down and it's lunchtime. I'm going to open my lunchbox and get my food out now. Like, you have to be that specific with your planning of routines. But at the same time, those routines get so boring. And an ADHD brain, typically they're finding, doesn't create the dopamine the same way that a normal brain does. So there's not as much available and it's not released as easily, which is why most of the drug treatments are heavy stimulants. Most of them start with the word meth because they're such heavy stimulants, and that makes your brain create more dopamine and release more dopamine.
Yeah.
So not having that available means that doing those boring things like opening your lunchbox and taking out your lunch instead of turning on your phone and seeing an endless stream of interesting information on Facebook, that endless scrolling of their news feed, without.
Okay. Yeah.
Totally lost where I was. Anyway, that habit just gets boring. It's not exciting. And so it's really hard to do that when you have this shiny thing over here. And for me, it's been, it's really hard. I empathize with my kid who has ADHD. Like, we get dressed and ready for school, and he says, I hate doing my morning routine. I hate brushing my teeth. I hate getting dressed. He hates going to school. It's boring to sit at a desk all day and listen to the teacher. And then we come home and he hates doing homework.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's hard. He knows the stuff. Like, when he sits down and does his homework, we'll bust through a worksheet in, a minute with 0 mistakes because he knows the stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just, not rewarding to do that worksheet.
So is there anything you do differently for him compared to the other kids that works best for him to speak to him and motivate him?
My wife is a lot more patient with him.
Okay.
Um, and we found that if we do homework right after we get home from school, when, before his meds have worn off, like it's a lot easier. He'll sit down and do it, and then he can just run off and play for the rest of the day. Good. And burn off all of his energy and stuff. Yeah.
Good. Well, that's good. You understand how he's thinking, and maybe a little bit better than someone who doesn't. Right. So, okay, that's great. So, do you have some advice for dads? We have dads listening around the world, all different types of dads. We have the dads that are sitting in the waiting room at the hospital, and they're going to be a dad this week, and they have no sweet clue what they're going to do because nobody's there to help them. So they're coming to the podcast to hear from us and listen in on our dad talk. Then there's dads who have kids and they're doing life, and sometimes they're just tired and they just need a break, and they're here listening. And then there's dads like me, where my 3 kids they're all gone. I'm an empty nester. They're all doing something. I haven't talked to my kids today at all. They're all off doing life, right? And it's a weird feeling having all their stuff sitting over there on the side of the room and they're not here. So we've got different dads at different stages, but do you have any advice from what you've seen, maybe a good dad in your past or yourself personally, that works for you as a dad?
I think just doing stuff with your kids. It sounds so easy and basic. But when my kids were born, they're all really close. I have my youngest just turned 4. My oldest will be 8 this year. So we just had kids like right on top of each other. And we're really seeing how quickly they grow up and how quickly they develop. And like you have a few years until you're an idiot and they want nothing to do with you. And
yes, you're right. Yeah.
And then I hear that, they come back later and they, they're grown-ups and they, want that relationship with you. But by then they're gone and, maybe having their own kids even. So you have a limited amount of time with them, and you have to teach them all these things that we've talked about, like discipline and, doing schoolwork and things like that. But you also have a limited time to really enjoy them and enjoy having them around. Right. And it's such a cliche that like they grow up and it goes by so fast, but it's the truest thing that I think I've heard. And I hated having little babies. They were not fun for me. I hate diapers. I love sleep. I just had a nap right before we were talking, so
yeah, nice. Love it. A good dad nap. I love a good dad nap.
Yeah, so like sleeping is my favorite thing to do, and you don't get a lot of those things when you have little tiny kids. But like that's also I think one of my fondest memories is my oldest kid. A few years ago, we were rocking in his room, and that's something my kids don't like to do anymore, is sit and rock to sleep. And that's one of my favorite things, is just having them, curled up on my lap and just having that quiet time. And the oldest one, the one with ADHD, said, "I love you, Dad." And he almost never says that to anyone. Like he's sensitive about words for some reason. Getting him to say please is like the hardest thing in the world. Like getting him to use a nice tone of voice is what we go for now. We don't make him say please even, because it's not going to happen. Yeah. Getting him to say I love you is a similar thing. And it's those precious moments like that where it's easy to just say, "Okay, go to bed so I can have my dad time." But then you're missing out on these other moments, these quiet times that you have one-on-one with your kids where those special magical things happen.
Yeah. I think from my point of view too, now that my kids are gone, I wish I wrote down more life events or my thoughts around life events. Because I really don't, I only have is some photos, videos. Back when my kids were little, social media wasn't as big. So I can't go back and see my Facebook memories of them when they're little because I wasn't really on there at that point. So, I wish I had some more documented memories that are reminders that kind of spark your mind and go, oh yeah, I remember the trip when we went to the thing and did the thing and the moose chased me down the road. I love having those little memories that pop up, but I wish I had done more of that, I guess. Now that my kids are gone, that's one of my regrets is, and if you're a new dad listening, grab a piece of paper and a pen or do some way of documenting some of the things when you're talking about rocking with your kids in the room. When, 20 years from now, or is that going to be a memory that's right front center? Maybe not, and you might forget that memory. Somehow document them, whatever works for you, but find a way to remember those things in the future because they'll be something you're going to lean on. Because again, the kids are gone, so it's quiet in the house. It's just my wife and I. And talk about great for napping, by the way. There's no noise at all. It's awesome. But you do miss the busyness, you miss the clutter, you miss the driving kids to sporting events and school and making their lunches and the hectic things in the morning and the routines. One day those all stop. And the silence is deafening at times as a dad. So I would love somehow to trade places with you and go see this amazing island, first of all, but just have the kids young again and have those moments of inconvenience where you have to live your life for somebody else because those days are going to come when they're gone and you're like, now what? So yeah. So there's, again, I love having dads on at different stages to talk about this stuff because that's why we created Dad Space. We just wanted to share dad stories, connect with other dads, encourage other dads to do your best. You're not going to be perfect, but your kids love you. Your partner loves you, and you just show up every day and do your best. And when those snakes in the trees happen, you just hope and pray that all of the things you invested in your kids just show up when it needs to show up, and they trust and listen to you because you've earned their trust along the way. So that's kind of why we have the podcast, and to have you on is great. I so want to visit you and just take a tour of this island. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's
really, really
super
cool.
fun.
So the podcast you mentioned again, Carl the Human. So everyone can go over there and like and share and follow along. How often do we get a new episode from you for Carl the Human?
I've been on a good streak of every week. I started out every other week, and then I found that I would work on it for 3 or 4 days, and then I'd take a week off, and I thought I might as well just spend 3 or 4 days a week on it. So I'm doing it every week. I have great plans for the next couple months. I'm several weeks out planned ahead, so I'm excited. Beautiful.
Awesome. I love talking to podcasting. It's we're a little community, and I love the fun. And the thing is, it's your podcast. You can do whatever you want. You can release it as many times or as often as you wish. It's your show. You can do whatever you like. No one's going to fire you from your podcast. So you're good. That's awesome. So everyone can go over there and check out Carl the Human. And then as well, the other podcast you mentioned, the Midnight Burger podcast, I'm into that. And the Badass Counseling Show. Some really good suggestions. I really thank you for making time to talk. And now you have time to go back for another nap.
Yeah.
Thanks for being part of Dad Space.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
It's great.
You're a great guest.
Oh, good.
From host to guest. You did a great job. Really enjoy having you on Dad Space. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Dad Space today. Go check us out on all of our social media, YouTube, all that great stuff. You can find us as Dad Space Podcast. Real simple. Dad Space Podcast, whether you're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, even YouTube. Email us, dadspacepodcast@gmail.com. We're always looking for great guests to come on the podcast. If you have any feedback for us, let us know here at Dad Space. Looking forward to connecting with you on the next episode, right here of Dad Space. Follow us on your podcast app for more. Cheers. To you, Dad. Thank you.